Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 321 for Monday, October 28th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including on video on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, as always, is a spooky Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Well, spooky is definitely what we were talking about in the Red Nerd Distance. That is the extended version of the program that we record every single week for our patrons. If you go to patreon.com/thespawnchunks, you can join at any level that you like. It helps us make the show, and you get extra content. You get to see Jonny and I talk about basically whatever we want outside of the regular show. It's usually another 20 or 30 minutes of content. This week was all about Halloween films, tabletop gaming, some creepy tabletop stuff in Morkborg that Jonny was running on the weekend, and also some of our family-friendly recommendations for Halloween films like Nightmare Before Christmas and The Muppet Haunted Mansion, I think was the other one. If you also want to check out the extended content, the member-only Hangout happened this past Saturday. That's the October Hangout. That's where we do kind of like a quick login with our patrons, people that are part of the community. We talk about what they've been building in Minecraft over the last month. And so that was recorded on Saturday, and it's out on the patron member feed right now.
A lot of our patrons also playing Satisfactory, so I think a lot of them are going to relate to your contribution to this week's quick login on the show. How's everything going, Joel?
Going very well. I have increased the production that I'm putting through in the game, and I am now completely through Tier 7, which is basically where I was in my other playthrough. So the other playthrough that has roughly like 1,100 hours in it. I'm at about 150 hours now in this new playthrough, and all of it streamed, all of it live. I don't really play offline, so it's all available on Joel Duggan VODs on YouTube. And I'm at that point now where I have to kind of make my own fun, like because the next tier is like Tier 8, and then opening up into Phase 4 in the space elevator is a ton of work. Like you get into like nuclear expansions and all this kind of stuff. And it really, really layers on at this stage. Aluminum is where I am in terms of needing to put up a permanent production line, and aluminum is really complicated. It's a thing that really hangs up a lot of players, and even to set up something temporarily is just kind of rough. I did it, but it's just like I have to constantly feed it. So I'm trying to think about what that might be like in Minecraft, but think about something that isn't automatic. Like you've got a manual sugarcane farm that you're just growing near water, and every once in a while you have to go over and harvest it. Like it's just that kind of tedium. And so I don't have that automated yet. And I don't think I will. Like I've got a funny feeling that rather than trying to do a new aluminum setup in this playthrough, I'm going to return to Devastator and use the existing aluminum setup where I'm producing something like, 1,000 aluminum ingots per minute or something in that giant factory. So I'm hoping in the future that with the latest patch that'll come out, I think this week in Satisfactory, that I'll have that sorted. But I have been doing a lot of decorating, and the Sunstreaker factory that I set up is now finished. It's based off of the Lamborghini Transformer Sunstreaker from the G1 series. He's a lot of yellow and red and orange lights, and so he's got some blue highlights depending on what comic image you might be looking at. And so rather than going too black with it, I decided to go with some brighter colors. And the interior is all blue and yellow, and then the exterior has got like orange lights. In the final paint, which I don't have a daylight screenshot of, it's got more red in it, and it really kind of helps it look more like a sports car. Inside, there's also a lot more red now. And it was a tricky situation because like you're doing that live and you think, yeah, this looks good. I like the contrast. And then later on, you're taking screenshots. You're like, this kind of looks like a McDonald's.
Oh no!
I did not intend for this to look like a McDonald's. It also looks like a cat. If you look at it the right way in the daylight with the windows lit up, it kind of looks like a cat with like ears and eyeballs. Anyway, once you see that kind of stuff, it's just like in Minecraft. You make something that looks like a face and you can't unsee it, then you're just like, all right, well, now it's a cat. But it's been fun, and something that I've been thinking about a lot has been like the lighting effects and the control that you have in Satisfactory to like change the color of lights that are hovering over your builds, that then change the tint of everything. Also just having signs in the game that you can kind of remove the text from and change the background to a very bright color and increase the luminosity, and it ends up looking like a light even though it's designed to be a sign. And they did that intentionally, obviously. And what's nice about that is just the fun kind of like sci-fi cyberpunk kind of technical look that you can get. But it did make me think about, wanting more lighting control and more lighting options in Minecraft. Like, so much of Minecraft is sci-fi, not sci-fi, is not sci-fi. It's fantasy. You've got like lanterns and candles, and you've got blocks that light up, but you don't have a lot of sub block options. And even the regular blocks, if you want to use something for street lights, there always is a suspension of disbelief in Minecraft where you have to take something that is like a frog light or even a copper bulb and kind of pass that off as like a modern street light. But it's almost like it's a modern street light that's been made to look retro, because it still looks like it's turn of the century. Like, it doesn't look, that it's 2024 kind of street light stuff. There's no LEDs in Minecraft unless you're playing modded. And so I was just thinking a lot about how, the lighting control in Satisfactory is a really cool part of the creation process. So like, even though I'm putting in very different shapes and not dealing at all with blocks, it is really cool to have like lighting be considered as you're putting this together. And one of the reasons I want to start playing Minecraft with shaders, if I can, is to try and have lighting be part of my creative process. I also really like nudging stuff around. I think I mentioned this before on the show, but being able to put stuff on Satisfactory on a grid as it is usually placed, but then having the ability to then nudge it off the grid is really, really handy when you want to make a wall that's not half a meter thick. You want to make it a meter thick or 3 meters thick. Satisfactory, the scale is just kind of blown way, way high. But in Minecraft, same idea. Like, I just think, like, how cool would it be if you could place an anvil and like nudge it into the block next to it, and do that repeatedly. Very similar to what's done with armor stands, but like if it was part of the game, it was very quick and easy to do. I think there'd be a lot of textures and stuff opened up. Now, again, that's not how Minecraft works, but it just sort of like makes you think, like, what are the things that I could take from this other creative game that I'm building and try to apply it as a different way of thinking in Minecraft. And thankfully, some of the new things they're coming out with, which we'll get to later in the show today, have that kind of layering ability. So like, there are some things and some ideas that I can take from Satisfactory and kind of bring into Minecraft. So in Satisfactory, you can build these walls, and they're quite thin. If you've ever played any of the other building games out there where you build walls, they tend to be very, very thin. But in Satisfactory, you can kind of layer them on top of each other and then cut out sections. So then you can actually have depth that's just like as thick as the wall. In Minecraft, you'd have to do like a layer of blocks on every level. So if your block wall is 4 blocks thick with 1 in the back that's solid, you could have 3 levels of detail. But you have to build it at a scale that makes that look good. And so I've just been thinking about either increasing the scale, thinking about my sci-fi build in the future in Minecraft, and thinking about like, I really have to make sure that I'm giving myself like a ton of depth. So like, if I'm thinking about building something with a wall in it in the sci-fi zone in Minecraft, I'm going to be thinking like, this wall is going to be 4 blocks thick, just in case. If I don't use the space, fine. But if I have the space and I want to layer in like lights behind pillars or walls with different textures, and even in Minecraft where you want to layer in textures, like putting glass in front of something to change the tint of it, you need that extra layer of block space to do it. So it just has me thinking about like things I've learned from Satisfactory, how I'm going to apply them in Minecraft. And I'm curious, for our listeners out there, if you're playing other building games, maybe it's Tiny Glade, maybe it's a city building game like City Skylines or something. Like what building techniques do you pick up from other building games that you then come back to Minecraft with, and then kind of use that to inspire or come up with some new techniques? I'd be very curious, because I feel like the time that I've been spending in Satisfactory has kind of fueled some new ideas for Minecraft, and it's cool. Like, it's kind of neat to see a different building game and how they do it, and then how you can go back and apply it to Minecraft.
I assume in Satisfactory, lighting doesn't have much of an effect on gameplay aside from just illuminating stuff and being able to see, right? Like, it's
Correct.
It's not the way it works in Minecraft, where you have mob spawning dictated by light levels and stuff like that. Like the enemies or kind of like, animals or whatever in Satisfactory are just going to spawn wherever they naturally show up. The difficult part of it is always disentangling aesthetic lighting from the fact that lighting in Minecraft is so tied into mechanical stuff like mob spawning. And that's one of the frustrations, I think, with building in Minecraft, is that Satisfactory obviously can focus heavily on the building and automation side of the games because it's not trying to be this catch-all sandbox kind of environment. Whereas Minecraft, you obviously have to balance in the PvE aspect of like defending your house from zombies and the monsters that arrive at night, which is, I think, a much older concept, it feels like now. Like it feels like the kind of thing that was in the environment of games that were made in the late 2000s and kind of early 2010s, and maybe now people have diversified the sandbox environment. You don't get as many situations where it's like, well, monsters obviously spawn at night because that's just what video game does, right?
Yeah, in Satisfactory, they do spawn naturally in the world, usually around resource nodes, so they're guarded. So it, depending on how you have your megafauna settings set up, they can either be passive, retaliation, or aggressive. And if you have them on aggressive, that's just the default gameplay, which means they'll attack you if you come near. And you have to clear them before you can mine the node. But as soon as you have a building with power in a spawn area, then the animals will no longer spawn. So it's not like Factorio where you're constantly defending your base. Also, the aggressive animals will never come up into your base. So even if they've spawned elsewhere, they're not going to wander up a ramp and all of a sudden you're going to have like a fluffy-tailed hog or a spitter in your base chasing you around. The passive animal, the one, it's the giant whale tick you've probably seen in images, that will wander into your base, and it's infuriating because the thing is the size of an elephant or two, and it gets stuck on things. Like the hitbox doesn't work. Like it's really janky. I really wish they would give us options to remove some of that kind of stuff that maybe breaks your immersion or causes some problems. And just be like a menu slider, just turn whale ticks on and off. That would be nice. But no, when thinking about the lighting in Minecraft, I wasn't so much thinking about like the light level so much as it is just like different visual options.
Sure.
To be able to move things. Like, for example, like the signs in Satisfactory, you can put them on a wall, you can stick them on the ground and they have a post like a sign. But if you use a trick where you can put a beam in the ceiling, you can attach a sign to the beam, and then the sign looks like a halogen light. Like it looks like a typical factory light, that you'd see over a factory floor. It's not necessarily designed to be a light. Like it doesn't give off light in the game. It just gives off like a visual light, just like Minecraft in some cases. But yeah, like I think that kind of control would be nice to have, especially if we had more like sub-block. Like imagine if we had like a light emitting trapdoor in Minecraft.
Yeah.
Think about what that would open up in terms of design flexibility, being able to do different styles in Minecraft, still have it be something that would make sense. I'm not sure how it'd have to be some sort of like glowing mythical thing for it to fit in fantasy Minecraft. But if it also looked like, put two of them together and it looks like a ceiling light, then that would be really, really cool too, right? It's the same sort of tricks that you see when people take like an end rod, and even though it's the base of the lamp, when you stick like a wool block on top of it, it looks like a lampshade and it gives off light. It's just the base of the lamp that happens to be giving off light, not the actual top of it. And people use end rods for like halogen tubes in modern builds all the time too, right? So it's that kind of stuff, but more of it. Like I'd like to see more of it. It would be cool if we had different colors. Like imagine if breeze rods and end rods gave us blue and yellow rods that we could use in the same way that we use end rods. Like that kind of stuff would be nice to have, I think, in Minecraft.
Yeah. I think it's a difficult line for the developers to walk, where they want stuff that feels versatile and can fit in a variety of styles, but isn't going to like, it isn't going to feel weird that it exists in a world like Minecraft naturally, right? And that's where you can kind of do that stuff with the end, because it's kind of spooky and otherworldly and this sort of like moon-like landscape, but it doesn't make as much sense to throw stuff like that in the overworld, where it feels like it would be like a discarded halogen tube somewhere. It feels a little different to what the Minecraft overworld is meant to be about.
Yeah. So what have you been doing in Minecraft this week?
Survival Guide is now updated to the latest version, so we're on 1.21.3 as of the latest update. We'll get into that in the news, but I have started using bundles, which is, to my great delight, working really well for me. I have one bundle that, in true Batman fashion, I dyed it black and called it my utility belt. and that is the one that all of the workstations go on. So like I was sort of saying in my previous rambles about bundles, having a crafting table, an ender chest, a furnace, and a stone cutter just taking up one space in your inventory is genuinely really great. Like, it's a game changer for me, because that's the kind of stuff that I want to have on me all the time when I'm building in projects, and I just want to grab stuff when I'm halfway up a wall and I don't want to have to like float down and then use a firework to get back up from whatever storage I have. So cram a bunch of stuff in the ender chest, carry an ender chest with you in a bundle, it's not taking up extra inventory space. That's all working for me really well. And I've started trying to figure out how I can squeeze a bundle into each of the themed shulker boxes I have in my ender chest, just for the sake of easier organization. So I discovered that one bundle, thanks to Prowl8413 for pointing this out on Twitter, one bundle can hold enough potion brewing components and the brewing stand and like the blaze rod and the nether wart and everything that you need to brew more potions than a shulker box can actually fit. Like, you can manage to get, I think, something like 30 or maybe even up to 60 potions brewed out of a single like potion brewing kit that fits inside of a single inventory space. So now the box that I have a ton of fire resist potions in, I go, well, if I need to brew more on the fly, I've got easy access to those potions and I can kind of refill on the go. My redstone box has one bundle for leftover components of all kinds, because I've always got a ton of redstone torches, because you need 3 of those just to make one comparator, so you're always crafting more than you need. And there's always like an extra spot in my redstone box that's just leftover redstone torches. Those go in the bundle now, as do the buttons, the pressure plates, the things where I've made like half a stack of them and then used 30 and I've still got 2 left over. So all of that stuff gets tucked away. I decided to make one bundle for the redstone box that just has all of the different wooden buttons in it. You can just chuck that in a bundle and it's not taking up half your shulker box to include that many, varieties of components. I'm trying to limit it to 12 items, though, and that's the difficult thing, is I could throw in stone and blackstone buttons as well, but then that gets over into 13, and suddenly I'm having those items hidden from me by the bundle UI. So I still feel like that's a compromise that I'm running up into with the bundle UI in Java, where it could be much bigger, but obviously they're factoring in different GUI sizes, different devices that you're playing on. So ultimately, I feel like it's a compromise that works for me. I'm just trying to figure out a way around it that makes it feel like I can still do what I want with them. But yeah, like looking ahead to the other stuff I can compact into a bundle, an entire village's worth of workstations can go in a single bundle. Like, you could set up for like half a dozen librarians, masons if you want to farm quartz from them, an armorer, you only probably want 1 or 2 of like the butchers and the leather workers and stuff like that, so you only need a couple of cauldrons and smokers in there. But then you can have like a mix of stuff and it all just gets compacted into one bundle, so you can start like mini village bundles throughout your entire collection. I think it's just really opened up a lot of fun options. That means inventory management can just be slightly more organized, and the compactness of it is really, really helpful for use with ender chests especially. So with that taken care of, I've started working on bulking up some of the features of the Windy City project that I'm working on at my build area. Starting with the monorail track, because I know where it's going to go. I don't have a build style in mind for it, but I'm just blocking out the shapes of everything in a neutral material like stone. And stone is probably going to be part of it. I might throw some like tough bricks and other building materials in there to give it some texture later, but for now, it's just helping to help things feel substantial and less like line work drawn on paper, Like, if something is fleshed out and filled in and it feels bulky, then I get a much stronger sense of how much space does this actually need when I'm planning my city blocks and planning like where some stuff is going to go. Do I have to accommodate the fact that, no, a big stone support needs to go here if it's a certain space along, or like, can this be worked into the buildings themselves and have the arches sort of hold up the monorail from the inside space of a building or just from the roof space of a building? And now that I've started to figure that out, I can also start to think about the scale of the other buildings. I'm starting to tear down a section of the hillside where the nether portal is so that a bigger station can be built around it. and it's just starting to feel like a more substantial project in general and less like a bunch of theoretical ideas that I was working with. So that's sort of my ongoing project that's going to take me into like the winter months of the year, I think, is going to be working on this city and getting it up to scratch.
I like the idea of putting in the bones. Like you've got the lines in the ground, but then you start to put in like the transit lines and how you're going to move around through it. And I think that is where you start to think about like how high other buildings are going to be, where they're going to be in the way. Obviously, by putting in the monorail, you're also adding height to what is otherwise like a 2D plan. And I find that in Satisfactory, same idea. Like when you start to think about like, okay, well, this is where the floor plan is going to go, but what does this building look like in floor 2, floor 3? Where is the stairs? Like, how do I get to the second floor?
Yeah.
And in this now, you'll have to think about like, okay, well, there's the monorail and there's the station, but like what buildings allow me to access the monorail? Is it going to be every building it passes through? Is it going to be is there going to be a hub in the middle? Like it gives you some idea of how to plan it out. And I find more and more, even though in Minecraft it's a lot more work, to lay out like really quick scaffolding, not the scaffolding block, but like a block of choice that is probably going to be part of the palette, but just like knowing you're going to be replacing them and knowing you're going to be texturing things, I find it so much nicer to just go ahead and put in the big forms. I did it with my keep. I did it with some of the roads and stuff in my West Hill build. Like I really just needed to see them and I needed to walk around on them to be able to make decisions about how I wanted them to be. And then once I realized, okay, I'm done nudging this road left and right, 2 or 3 blocks, I'm done messing with the height of this tower, then I would texture it. And sometimes the entire thing would get replaced. Like sometimes none of the stone in that tower exists. It's now been replaced by all kinds of different blocks. But I needed that visual thing kind of hanging around as I worked on the big project in order to inform like decisions that I just wasn't ready to make now, but I would be ready to make later after I've looked at it for 2 or 3 weeks on stream, going like, you know what, I really don't like the height of that. Let's change that. And I feel like I sometimes can't make those decisions right away. So I'm wondering, when you're building this, have you found that any of the original plans that you've had have had to shift yet? Like, have you decided like, oh, wait a minute, this is going to be a taller monorail than I thought? Is it going to be in the same place that you thought it was going to be, or have you found that you've moved it already compared to what your original idea was?
I think the monorail is staying where it is, and I think everything else has to adapt around it. But I wanted there to be like archways and have a road go underneath one of those, and then I realized that road's probably going to have shops and stuff on it that are going to be part of this commercial area near the station. And then I realized that the monorail goes directly over one of those, so it's only going to be a ground floor shop because you really can't fit a house in that because you have a train running through your house, right? And so, yeah, like I need to like resculpt some of the ideas that I had initially for this, and some of my instinct was just to put down like little bits and pieces of blueprints, and I hadn't built the full length of the track. And then I realized, no, it's going to have to go straight over the top of this. I can't do anything too substantial. And yeah, planning around infrastructure like that is like a blessing and a curse, really. Like it's the kind of thing where you can have a perfectly like in your head it makes sense, because in your head you fudge all of the numbers. You end up like imagining something that might not make sense in a physical space and doesn't make sense with Minecraft's block grid, and there's so many little bits and pieces you have to adjust as you go. But yeah, I think if I get the width of the monorail track figured out, if I get the supports for the monorail track figured out, then I know what space the buildings below have to accommodate. I know whether I'm putting like, an alleyway and stuff in there instead of a building. Do I kind of change up my idea of what goes where? And that feels a little bit more adaptable to me. The monorail is also just a practical concern. If I want to get from one side of this massive plains biome to the other, that's how I get there. I just hop in a boat and then zoom over on the blue ice track. And that means, it works as a player transport option as well as a fictional piece of infrastructure for the city. So I think that's what gives it that sense of priority for me, is that it's both it's something I can interact with as a player of the game, as well as thinking about it as an architect and thinking of the city as like a real space. So yeah, I'm slowly starting to fit together the language that I'm working with the city, like the shapes and the block palettes and everything. But in the meantime, just bulking up stuff like this really makes sense.
I could see, because of that priority of the monorail, I could see it actually going down through buildings. So like, how in some places, markets or shops or houses will just use existing infrastructure as like, oh, this is a giant aqueduct. I'm going to build my house here, but that means there's one less wall that I have to construct because I'm going to use the aqueduct as like my back wall. Well, you could use it like the pillar could be like right in the middle of a building. Like if it was a square or a circular building, and the pillar could be just like supporting the monorail at the top, but in the middle, maybe that's a centerpiece of like a market where you have to walk around and there's shops all around the outside, or even if it's just like an open air, like a park, like you can still have stuff directly underneath the monorail, depending on whether it's a building or not. Like just kind of incorporate the support of the monorail as like, this is a priority. So like we just had to build the park around it. That kind of stuff could be really cool.
Yeah, it's early days, but I'm getting into that, and it's an exciting project to come back to. For now, though, we're going to move on into the news because, as I mentioned, Java Edition 1.21.2 was released on Tuesday, October 22nd, followed almost immediately by .3, but we'll cover that in just a moment. In the meantime, new features in 1.21.2 added bundles. We've talked about them ad nauseum, but for anybody who hasn't caught up on recent developments with the bundle, a bundle is an item that can pack different items together into the same stack. A bundle only fits one stack, usually 64 items, but it can be a mixture of many different item types. You can insert items into a bundle directly in your inventory, and they have a tooltip that shows the items inside. If a bundle has less than 12 items inside with the new GUI, the tooltip will show all of them. Otherwise, the tooltip will show the top 3 rows of items with at least 8 item types, and the others will be hidden below. You can select any of the visible items to pull out of the bundle, right-clicking to take the first item and using the scroll wheel to select a different item and then right-click to take it. When selecting an item to remove, the bundle icon shows that item poking out of the bundle. When holding it in your hand, you can empty items onto the ground by right-clicking or holding right-click. The bundle is now crafted with 1 string and 1 leather, making them very accessible in the early stages of the game. And the controls have changed from the original prototype, so you use left-click to put an item in a bundle, right-click to remove the top item from a bundle, and use the mouse wheel to scroll and select something else with right-click to remove it. So along with bundles, there are a lot of changes coming to 1.21.2, many of which we've covered in previous snapshot changelogs, but they are collected here. Enabled hardcore mode for realms and updated the world creation screen for realms. Trial chambers have been updated with new variations to the hallways primarily, including encounters, which are short challenges leading to a larger chamber. The beds in intersections now have their colors randomized instead of always appearing the same, and they've replaced the empty chests at the entrances of chambers with a hopper and a barrel to make it more obvious that they are just for dropping off equipment. They've added baby versions of dolphins, squids, and glow squids, along with salmon variants, bringing that in line with Bedrock Edition. Sneaking while bouncing on a slime block will no longer cause fall damage. Tweaks to existing blocks, items, and entities. There's also a list of those further down the changelog, so we won't cover absolutely everything, but there's a lot there. Banner pattern items have some new names and icons. Redstone torches have now been given a new look to give them a unique and distinctive identity. They've added 2 new banner patterns for the field masoned and the border indented. The distance that bees fly, as well as cooldowns between bee behaviors, have been tweaked to make them a little bit less fly away. Illager raid spawn logic has been updated. Smithing template items are now named after their template type instead of the generic smithing template name. They instead specify that they are a smithing template through a subtitle in the hover text. Equipping a carved pumpkin on your head now removes the player marker from other players' maps. Various items and blocks have had their assigned rarities changed, and there are some new introduced accessibility features. The game will now limit the maximum frame rate when it's minimized or when the player is AFK, and a new video setting has been introduced to configure this behavior. There are improvements to the game's performance. They've added language support for High Norwegian with this release, and throwing items out of your inventory very quickly in creative mode is now throttled. So the Minecraft.net changelog has a ton of additional information on many of these changes, including technical changes and bug fixes. We've covered it all on previous shows where we covered the snapshots, but if you want to read the full changelog and get everything in one place, you'll find it linked in our show notes over at thespawnchunks.com. Just to briefly recap as well, Minecraft Java Edition 1.21.3 was released on October 23rd, so a day after the previous release, and it's a hotfix that just resolves 2 bugs, one critical and one not so critical. The critical one being attempting to join a realm with a resource pack enabled failed with an error, so people were unable to log into their realms for the day. And the other bug is salmon from 1.21.1 or previously shrank when they updated to 1.21.2. So you only had baby salmon in your world if you updated day and date with 1.21.2. But that's now been fixed, and you can find that changelog once again in our show notes over at thespawnchunks.com.
Minecraft Bedrock Preview 1.21.50.25 was released on October 24th. This week, 2 new features are coming into the Pale Garden, Resin and the Eyeblossom. Resin is a new block that you can craft after an encounter with the Creaking, and the Eyeblossoms are a flower unique to the Pale Garden that blooms at night. New features and bug fixes in the Bedrock Preview. Under resin clumps are a new multi-face block, dropping by the Creaking when it is destroyed, placing around a Creaking heart when the Creaking is attacked. It can be crafted into a block of resin, and it can be hardened into resin bricks in a furnace, and can be used to trim armor. Resin bricks can be crafted into the resin brick set, which include brick blocks, stairs, walls, slabs, and chiseled resin brick blocks. Resin clumps and resin bricks can be found in chests in woodland mansions, and a block of resin can be crafted into a Creaking heart using 2 pale oak logs. The Eyeblossoms are new flowers that generate in the Pale Garden biome, and they have 2 variants, closed and open. They transition between the 2 variants based on the time of day. During the night, Eyeblossoms are open. During the day, Eyeblossoms are closed. In dimensions that do not have a day-night cycle, they will remain as is or as placed by the player, which is cool. Eyeblossoms on the ground will communicate with each other in helping each other open and close. Open Eyeblossoms have glowing eyes during the night. Eyeblossoms can be obtained by bone mealing the grass in the Pale Garden biome. Bees get poisoned when they interact with Eyeblossoms. Suspicious stew made from Eyeblossoms will have a blindness or a nausea effect depending on the Eyeblossom variant used, and gray or orange dye can be crafted from closed and open Eyeblossoms respectively. In the Pale Garden, naturally generated Creaking hearts now drop 20 to 24 experience even when collected with Silk Touch. The frequency of Creaking heart ambient sounds have been increased, and the texture of the inactive Creaking heart has been updated to be more consistent with its active state. The speed of Creaking has been changed. They are now faster when aggravated. Creakings now deal more attack damage. When a Creaking heart is destroyed, its Creaking will now twitch for a few seconds before crumbling. Creakings spawned by a Creaking heart will crumble when stuck in a hole with a player for more than 5 seconds. This prevents a provincial soft lock, as an invulnerable Creaking would prevent a player from mining or placing any blocks, requiring them to exit and re-enter the world to force the Creaking to despawn. A Creaking crumbling now causes nearby skulk catalysts to bloom. However, no skulk will be placed since the Creaking does not drop any XP. The Creaking walking animation has been updated, and the Creaking's attack animation has also been updated. A Creaking spawned by a Creaking heart no longer avoids damage blocks. A Creaking spawned by command or spawn egg is no longer invulnerable to fire or lava. A Creaking spawned by command or spawn egg now will avoid damaging blocks, and the Creaking's attack speed has been decreased to match Java Edition. Under features and bug fixes, there are a number of features and bug fixes specific to Bedrock that you can read in the Minecraft.net changelog article linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com. One bug fix, however, related to the winter drop was that pale oak saplings can now grow on moss blocks and pale moss blocks.
So Bundles of Bravery is here, and it's exciting to see that there are more developments in the Pale Garden. That's going to be our main discussion this week, because we like to shift some of that stuff to a slightly more longer and more thoughtful discussion. So I will say that I've been so fixated on bundles that you'll forgive me if I forgot how many other excellent changes were made in this most recent update. So Enderpearl chunk loading is a thing that is worth highlighting. I think reliable dimension hopping coming along with that is really cool, something that I definitely want to be playing around with. I've already really enjoyed the fact that you can ride a boat through a nether portal now and be instantly transported, and that's part of why this monorail in my Windy City project is so important, because I can go straight from the nether onto a blue ice track in the overworld. I don't keep my momentum, but I can build up momentum again very quickly and just be traveling the same way, which is really cool. The other stuff I'd noticed popping up here and there in gameplay is I've already encountered like baby squid and different sizes of salmon, and I found those while I was playing in an earlier snapshot, but they're still a pleasant surprise. I think the fix is to bee behavior. While most of the bees around my like build areas right now are pretty locked down, they're in farms or they're, wandering off doing their own thing in areas that I don't travel to all that much. But I think making bee behavior more consistent is going to be a really good thing. So hopefully that's fixed a lot of people's issues with bees in terms of keeping them in an organic setting. And I really need to go out and run a new trial chamber because there are new encounters in those intersections, and I really want to see what those feel like. So even though I thought I was done with trial chambers for a little while, maybe this week or next I'll hop back into a trial chamber and see if I can track down one that hasn't been loaded in my world yet, so I can generate one with encounters and see how they feel.
Lucy in our live chat is reminding us that the Spacefire refills crafting now as well. So another quality of life.
Yes, change. Such a huge change. Like genuinely such an important one, because I'm so used to that shortcut from villager trading and being able to like repeat a villager trade over and over again. Like, even though we covered this, I think, when they initially made this change in a snapshot, even though the crafter has made it a lot easier to craft the awkward stuff like dispensers and whatnot, I think having the option to craft dispensers that way from a click and spam spacebar approach is actually going to be really helpful to people. So it's cool that even though auto crafting is in the game now, they've also thought of ways to make manual crafting a lot more approachable to people.
I think too, it also makes folks that are not interested in the crafter or find it too challenging at first, gives them options. Like having more than one way to do anything in the game is never a bad thing, right? And I think having more crafting options is great, especially if you don't need enough of something to warrant setting up a crafter, but you need enough of it that it's still a pain in the butt to do manually. So like there's that weird middle ground of like you need like 24, half a stack, but you don't need 3 stacks. If you need 3 stacks, use a crafter. If you need just like this handful, like a decent handful of stuff, then using the new features, I think, is going to be a boon for people that have that. Especially for me, like when I am crafting something where I know I'm going to be using a lot of them, but I don't know how many. So like spruce trapdoors, for example. Well, that might not be the best example because I use that so often. I just have several stacks on hand. But like something where you're repeating a pattern in a build, and you know you're going to need a lot of, but you have no way of calculating because you're kind of building on the fly. Like maybe you need a lot of pillars, or stone walls, and you don't know how many though. So it's better to kind of build them on the fly. I think that kind of stuff is really handy.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's so many little quality of life things coming through in minor updates, but it's cool that they arrive alongside new features as well. And of course, this also marks the release of Hardcore for Bedrock Edition. You got Hardcore on Realms for Java, which I didn't realize wasn't an option before, but I guess considering Hardcore only allows you to either spectate or get kicked out when you die in a world like that, it makes sense that it had to be released to Realms in a much more signposted way so that people didn't accidentally set their realm to Hardcore and get upset when they were like effectively banned from a realm that they paid for. So yeah, I'm curious to see if people will be adopting that more as Realms and stuff goes on. Hopefully we'll get some listener email about people playing in Hardcore on Bedrock Edition and get to hear some of their thoughts as well.
I did enjoy some of the marketing around Hardcore on Bedrock. Java players have been sitting on the edge of their chairs and having anxious gameplay for years, and now you Bedrock players can join in the fun? ? Like, I thought it was pretty cute the way that they were pitching it. It's like you're welcome, we think, which I think is very, very cool. I do like the idea of some servers with like the stuff that you did as well recently with extra lives or having hardcore but with like tweaks. Like I think it gives a finite nature to the experience on servers, and it kind of like lights a candle underneath players' butts to just be just a little bit more mindful as they're playing, and consider consequences when that's not always a thing that you experience in Minecraft, depending on what your world settings are like.
Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully we'll hear from some people sharing their thoughts on these updates. In the meantime, we're going to talk about the changes that arrived to the Pale Garden, and we have a listener email that's going to tie into that discussion a little bit later. So we're going to skip over listener email for now and return to that mid-discussion. So the Pale Garden got an expansion. I'm actually quite surprised by this, but very happy at the same time, because people were kind of proved right when they said Mojang is clearing out all of the foliage from this biome last week when we talked about the bedrock changes that meant any flowers and whatnot at all that generated the Pale Garden got removed. And some people said they're just clearing it out so they can plant something new in there. And I was like, I'll believe it when I see it. And now I'm seeing it, and I'm very, very happy about that. So we're going to talk about the Eyeblossom. We're going to talk about Resin. I think Resin is probably a good place to start because it seems like a pretty fleshed out mechanic with a lot of blocks and stuff that we can talk about and especially give our opinions about as builders. So when do you hear about Resin, Joel, and what was your initial reaction to it?
I was on a Satisfactory stream on Wednesday when the article came out, and it wasn't the Bedrock release, it wasn't the beta, it was like an article just outlining Resin and talking about it in general. They both came out the same day. And so I popped over live on stream to just take a look at the screenshots and see what was going on. And just as a quick, a note, I haven't actually had any time in game with it. I have watched a number of YouTube videos. I've seen a lot of screenshots. So like I've kind of seen other people's first impressions as well as like the block in the game, not in screenshots, no shaders, just kind of like that kind of experience. And the thing that I took away from it immediately, especially after watching Exumavoid's video, is that the resin clumps can be placed as a layered texture similar to glow lichen.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is, you're adding an item to the game that adds a new texture times as many blocks as there are in Minecraft. Now, not all of those combinations are going to look good. You might not even be able to see resin if you put it on a honeycomb block. But if you have it on stone, it looks like an ore. If you have it on grass or a dirt, it looks like it could be mushrooms or fungus, or it could be flowers. Like it can kind of really act as a bunch of different things. And similar to what we've seen in our community actually over the weekend with layering lapis and glow lichen together for a cool pattern in a build, you could use resin to add that kind of textured pattern to any block. Like if you want to have more orange, if you want to use it as part of a gradient, you're trying to move from orange to another color, you could use that as a transition. Like it really seems very flexible to me. I don't know about the way that you obtain resin. That's kind of where I was like, I don't know if that's my favorite. It seems kind of limited. Like you have to hit a creaking, which doesn't take damage. But then the tree that the creaking heart is in starts to spread resin around as you hit the creaking, which means you can only generate enough resin that there is room on that tree to generate the resin. And after that, you have to kill the creaking or retrieve the heart and then find another creaking and repeat the process. And granted, while you're facing the creaking, it's not going to attack you. It's just going to stare at you. You're basically just kind of like hitting a signpost to get more resin, but it does limit it. Like you can't craft it, you can't extract it from a pale oak tree, you can't use a creaking heart to make resin in some other way. I feel like there needs to be more ways to get resin than just that one. And yes, I understand that they have put resin and resin bricks in woodland mansions, but like that's not a sustainable way of getting anything.
Yeah. It's not renewable. Yeah.
Few and far between, right? So I kind of was hoping that I'm hoping that they will maybe implement some way of getting resin from the trees. Like I know that, logs in the game have to act a certain way. And if you put logs in a furnace, then they turn into charcoal. And like, that's how you can, it makes sense that the pale oak log would be the same. But I kind of wonder if there would be a way to have like the pale oak log give resin instead of charcoal. Like, I feel like that could be a cool way to do it. I don't know of another way that you could do it unless there was like getting resin to begin with. So you have to interact with the creaking to get it. But then once you have it, if there would be a way to craft more, like resin plus stripped pale oak log equals more resin. I don't know. But I feel like there needs to be some sort of better way to renew it. Because for the players that either have no interest in the creaking or find the creaking challenging or don't want to deal with it because it's creepy or whatever, thinking about players of all ages, then that kind of gates resin behind the experience of the creaking, right?
Yeah. Like, I spent a bit of time in the preview. I heard about it, but then wasn't able to get into the preview until basically earlier today. So I've had a limited amount of experience with it so far. I think the existence of resin solves a lot of problems people had with the Pale Garden as a biome, because it's a reason to go there, it's a reason to interact with the creaking, because people were saying, like, why would I even bother going here at night if I know that all that's going to happen is I get attacked by more stuff? Like, may as well just go during the day and take all of the creaking heart blocks, right? I think it's a reason to want to obtain the creaking heart, and the fact that it also makes the creaking heart renewable as a block, very cool. Like, I'm all for that, because I want to be able to farm them in a way that, in this case, gets around the problems of, like, tree farming logistics getting in the way of that. But I want to use them as a texture, so I want access to a bunch of them without having to completely deforest an entire Pale Garden biome, if that's, not going to be what other people on a server want, or if it's, a limited size biome. So I think it's great that we have that option with resin. I definitely agree that the glow lichen approach to placement of resin clumps, very good. Like, really happy that they've done that, and it's a lot less coverage than glow lichen gets. Glow lichen feels like it's about 50-50, maybe even slightly overwhelms some of the block textures, whereas resin feels smaller and more kind of, intentional almost in that same way. So I think it's nice that it's more like you could fake somebody out into thinking there was an ore there if you put it on stone. There's like an amber ore or something like that could be thrown into there. I also like that it's an armor trim color. That's really fun. But then I agree with you. I think it would be nice if there was a way to passively farm resin. I'm thinking about people who play on peaceful mode as well, right? Like, there's no way of getting it if you can't interact with the creaking, and you would get, like, occasional bits and pieces of it from Woodland Mansions. Maybe if they end up naturally generating some around where a creaking heart would be already. But that kind of gives the game away with the interaction you're supposed to have with the creaking. If you find resin on some of the trees and you think, well, that must be where the creaking heart is, I can go and grab that before it spawns a creaking at night. I was wondering if maybe at night the creaking heart block could have a small chance to just place resin passively without any interaction with the creaking, because that way it could sort of operate like Vine's growth tick in a way. Like, it could be like a random tick thing, and very gradual, very slow, doesn't have to be like constantly producing it. So interacting with the creaking speeds up the process, and it only happens at a certain time of day. So if you're playing on any difficulty level that spawns hostile mobs, then you are still going to have the creaking spawning. But the resin just being produced at a certain time, like the tree oozes at night, still feels creepy. Like, still kind of gives you that environmental, like, atmosphere that they're looking for, but gives you a way to farm the resource passively as well. And it has to be an active creaking heart, potentially, and that way it means that, the creaking is going to be guaranteed to spawn whenever there's any level of difficulty involved. And I think that's still a challenge. But a passive option feels good for people who play on peaceful, and then maybe if people find ways to prevent the creaking from spawning, they can still have a passive farm even in, regular survival difficulties. That's sort of my take on it, I guess. We have other takes on it coming in via email, though. So do you want to cover the email now?
Sure, yeah, I can dig into this. This comes in from Ghost of Notch, Resin, a sticky situation. Hi, Joel and Pix. My friend and I were thinking of the new resin coming to the winter drop, and we came up with some feedback we wanted to share. First of all, we think the resin is in general too orange. The color is okay, but we think it would benefit from some more yellow in the texture. Second, we don't think the block texture looks very good. The brick texture looks very good. With the bright orange color, the texture looks too busy, and we think the normal stone brick layout would look a lot better and cleaner. Also, the process of smelting the resin clump into a brick version is a little strange. We had an idea for a different result of smelting it. What if you could craft 4 resin clumps into 4 resin bricks, but if you smelted the resin clump, you got sap. Sap would be crafted into a block of sap, which would be sticky like slime and honey blocks. However, if you walked on it, you would sink slowly into it and move more slowly, like a cobweb. If your head was in it, you would suffocate. If you fell or sprinted on it, though, it would be the solid but eliminate fall damage. I would also give you the sticky effect for a couple seconds, which would decrease walking, mining, and attacking speed by a slight amount. Smelting the resin clump would give you sap, which could be brewed into a potion of stickiness. This would be an interesting feature for Minecraft, as there aren't really many blocks that give potion effects. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this idea, and if you think it would be something that would fit into the vanilla game. Thanks for taking the time to read the email. Best, Ghost of Notch suffocated in a block of sap whilst trying to escape the creaking, and his friend was shocked to death at the sight of the original resin blocks.
Yeah, resin bricks have been a controversial one. We'll get into our opinions on those in a second, but let's address the email here first. I think this might. I love the graphics that they provided along with this as well. They've done a really cool job of like retexturing, recoloring stone bricks to look like the kind of resin color that they're working with. I don't know if it's necessarily the right thing to do for reasons I'll get into later, but I do agree it kind of cleans up the texture quite a lot. The sap idea, I think, maybe overcomplicates resin too much. Like, it feels like so many additional steps, and I think resin is a great start that maybe they could expand upon later without feeling like they have to add in a ton of additional interactions for it. Like, I'm seeing it right now as a bonus for the Pale Garden, which is already adding, wood types and interactions with the creaking, comparator interactions with the creaking heart for redstone folks to play around with. And I feel like what people now want is like Bees 2.0, right? Like they want something where like Honey does a ton of different stuff. And I think really what you've got here is somebody trying to apply the same mechanics as Honey to another type of material, which doesn't necessarily feel like how resin would work. Also, I feel like smelting resin into sap is sort of the opposite way round. If anything, we should have sap first, and then resin is what happens when it hardens. So that sort of feels like it's the opposite way round to me.
That's what I was thinking as well, in that I like the idea of a less busy brick texture, because I'm not a fan of the resin bricks. I feel like they're just a little bit too busy, and I as someone that is familiar with the art of things, I like the idea of adding more yellow. There is a highlight in the resin bricks from Mojang, but it's just light orange. Like there's no hue shift at all, and I think that's one of the reasons why the bricks in general, the resin blocks in general, feel muddy despite the fact that they're bright orange, is that they don't deviate much from a hue perspective. And I think having some extra yellow in there does a couple of things. It makes it feel a little bit more refined. It makes it feel a little bit shiny, maybe even gives the impression of like a partially translucent surface, similar to what you get with Honey, but without having to have like that hitbox change. And I think that I like the image that they sent us, which we'll include in our show notes on thesponchunks.com as well, is really, really good. Like I like the clarity of it, even going ahead and adding like what a sap item might look like. I do agree with you though, Jonny. I think that while sap is a fun idea, especially the potion, like I think that's kind of cool. But none of the ideas behind sap blocks and all of the features that they listed in the game are unique. Like it's just taking a cobweb, a slime block, and a honey block and combining them into like ultimate block, right? Like just the idea behind Minecraft, I think, is to have these different items that do different things and give it, as a puzzle to the player, like how are you going to use these things in combination creatively to make your own fun? And I think that this kind of reminds me of kind of modded Minecraft, which is like one block to fix them all. And so the sap thing for me, I do like the idea of the potion and sap and sticky effect is kind of fun. I think that, to your point, getting the sap first would be a cool way to go from sap to resin bricks. And again, it might be a little bit too similar to bees, but it would be cool if the creaking heart had like a drip mechanic, like similar to how lava comes through dripstone and can be collected in cauldrons. Like it's really slow. But if you could collect sap like that by crafting creaking hearts, basically squeezing the sap out of them and then turning that into resin and resin bricks, I think that would be cool, but maybe too complicated. And I'm not sure whether that, is something that players want to wait around for. But I do like the idea of a way that makes sense of passively getting resin from the creaking heart in some shape or form, right? And I get the spirit of the email. I just think that it's the sap and the sap blocks are just a little convoluted for me.
Yeah, I think they took issue with the process of smelting resin clumps into a brick, and I think that's ultimately just down to that's what happens to materials when you put them in a furnace. They become bricks.
Yeah.
Like you kind of presume that the player has like a mold that they're using in the furnace because that's how you get iron ingots, gold ingots, copper ingots, and so forth. So I think if anything, players are going to expect anything they can smelt to come out as a brick of material. So I suppose that's, you know, the kind of thing. Yeah, like nether bricks do the same thing. That's sort of what we're used to mechanically right now. So it doesn't rock the boat too much in that. But yeah, it's cool to see people like taking these ideas and seeing logically where they can go, because I'm sure that's fuel to the fire for Mojang, if not in this update, then in future. Let's get into resin bricks as a block, though, because you've already kind of hinted at you disliking them. I kind of feel the same way. The resin blocks themselves, like the blocks of resin, are a much better texture, in my opinion, than the resin bricks. And I think there's an organic kind of feel to them. The bubbliness of them, it feels kind of drippy and like sappy. It feels like, it looks to me like fish roe, actually. It reminds me of like a sushi topping, and so I made like a little sushi in the Bedrock creative world that I spun up to try this out. But it looks like the kind of thing that you would get as sushi topping. I almost, in fact, want like a translucent version of it. Like I'd love one with like 80 to 90% opacity, something with a texture, but something that you could still see through a little bit, because then you could imagine it being like, you know, a poorly made stained glass window, or those kind of like bubbly window textures that you can sometimes find. Like, I think that might be a fun thing to play around with. I can understand why they maybe want to keep it as a solid block, because then you have issues of like, does it let light through, and, you know, visibility through the block, that kind of thing. But yeah, having played around with resin blocks, I think those are better than the resin bricks. The resin bricks are almost instantly off-putting. I think partly because your first instinct is to place them in a green biome, and they are a very contrasting color to green. Like, it's almost complementary color. And a lot of the time, without the other sort of warmer blocks surrounding them, they're going to look very stark in terms of contrast. I think the internal contrast of the texture as well, there's a lot of very high highlights and a lot of very like dark shadows in the joins between the bricks. And so they kind of feel noisy in the same way that like we've you know, said our piece about other materials in the past, like Blackstone feeling kind of noisy because there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of different colors and variation going on in there. I think the main problem, though, is that we have relatively few of these small brick textures. If you take all of the stone brick layouts of the brick textures, like if you look at stone bricks, you've got mossy and cracked variants of those, obviously, but then you have tough bricks, deep slate bricks, black stone, quartz. I guess the only two that deviate slightly are end stone bricks and mud bricks, but they all fit together quite nicely in a gradient, whereas the smaller bricks, like the clay bricks or the nether bricks sort of pattern, each of those has a very strong contrast to each other, and so if you're laying them out in a gradient, they don't work at all. They are meant to stand out rather than blend in, and I don't immediately see something that I want to use a block like this for. Like, I'm sure the community would find ways of using them and, like, you know, areas they could go in certain build styles, but it's not a block that I immediately knew what I was going to do with it the way I did with white wood, and the fact that I immediately came up with the fish roe comparison with resin blocks. I think resin bricks are a lot harder to find the niche for.
Yeah, I agree. It really limited as to what you can do with them, as opposed to being something that you can purpose in different ways. The thing about putting them in the overworld, I think, is just a quick kind of like gut reaction from people when they pop into a creative world and they want to mess around with these. Like, you're already in there. But I think that it would be really interesting to see how the resin bricks and the resin blocks look in the nether. I think that next to lava, you know, compared to as a contrast block, as like a background block. Like I was just talking earlier about having like 4 or 5 layers of bricks in your walls as depth. If these are the background color, and then you've got dark pillars or lava flows or the gray from basalt and polished basalt kind of in front of these, I could see that as kind of like, this looks like a deep, orange background, something hot at the core, that kind of thing. But I agree. I think I like the resin blocks better than I like the resin brick blocks. And we don't have stairs and slabs and walls in those, right? Like they learn nothing from Tough. Like Tough came out with Tough and Tough bricks, and everybody loves Tough. And they like Tough bricks, but they really liked Tough, and they wanted to do a lot more with it. And it took them another update before they added stairs and slabs to Tough. So I was kind of hoping that if they're going to release 2 block textures and they're going to give you, stairs and slabs and walls that have one, like do both. It like the inventory is already exploding, and you just released bundles. So like, hey, get in there and give us some options, because I think that the resin block could be used for a bunch of different things. Like I can see, if you really want to go loud with it, dragon scales, like make a giant dragon and have that be like, it's not quite scaly, but it's getting there.
It's organic enough, right? Like it's got that overlapping bubbly look to it that feels a lot less structural.
And when you look at it next to other blocks of the same color, shroom lights, lava, even like honeycomb, you can really see the lack of yellow that Ghost of Notch was talking about in the email. And I feel like it needs to have some hue shifts again to really help it look like it fits better with other blocks in the Minecraft space, but also remove that muddiness to it. Like you're dealing with orange, but you've not done anything else other than just like light and dark orange. And it really, when you're dealing with a bright primary color like that, you have to have some sort of hue shift somewhere, like even if, and they might have tried this, I don't know, it would be difficult to pull off, but if you had like a little bit of blue in the mortar as a contrasting color, that would help it a little bit. Maybe you'd have to again dial in with the contrast and see like what would work the best. But I don't really see myself using these in many ways. I find them kind of garish actually. I'm also not sure about the carved resin bricks, the ones that look like the
chiseled one,
creaking head, chiseled. Sorry, it's chiseled. The chiseled creaking head. Like it just, again, it's a cool idea, and it sticks with like the other things in the game. Like the chiseled sandstone has got the wither on it. You've got the chiseled blackstone has like the piglin snout. Like there's a bunch of stuff like that. But like it's kind of like a one-off thing. You can't really tile it. It doesn't give you an extra texture to play with. It's just like I have to put a Minecraft thing here. Like if I wanted to create like a creaking area or something like that. It is what it is, and it doesn't really read as anything else, which I find tricky. But I haven't seen anybody put any glass in front of this. Like orange stained glass would be interesting to see next to some of this resin stuff, because I do find that in the oranges and the reds, Minecraft can be pretty spot on, but then when you get into the yellows, like yellow stained glass is almost green. Like it has a real paleness to it. Same with sometimes the yellow concrete is a little bit bright. I find yellow terracotta is pretty good. It's more of that golden kind of color. And so I'm wondering, like, even if you put the resin bricks next to something more like the concrete colors, I still don't think it's going to read as quite as primary as people want it to. So it's very limited in what you can do with it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I tested it next to a bunch of other blocks, and in the orange kind of gradient, it goes along with orange concrete, and orange terracotta next to it feels almost brown by comparison. Like it feels so much duller because the resin bricks are so saturated. And alongside all of the other chiseled blocks, I think the chiseled resin brick fits in kind of between chiseled red sandstone and nether brick, but again, it's so bright compared to how dark nether brick is. I would be really interested to see people move it into the nether and use it there. I think resin blocks without the brick texture, the natural resin block, looks really good with shroom lights and magma blocks. I could see myself using that if I did something like in Survival Guide Season 1, I had a lava flow coming down a mountain, but it was mostly magma blocks with patches of shroom lights instead of using the lava liquid. And I think that's a fun block that you could throw in there for this kind of like bubbling rock texture. But again, I keep coming back to how resin blocks are so much more useful than the brick side of things. Yeah. So I can see people using it when they just want a brightly colored house, like especially with younger players when they go into creative and the first thing they do is build a house out of diamond blocks. Like, absolutely, people are going to love that because it's just a big, obnoxious, bright color. And if you think about the broader scope of Minecraft players, you might find people who absolutely love working with stuff like that and don't have the finer aesthetic sensibility, finer in inverted commas, it's all a matter of taste. But I think that as we as people who enjoy the nuance of building and enjoy subtleties in the way Minecraft's block palette is put together, this feels like a contrast in a lot of different ways. And so that's maybe a little harder to swallow. But I will see what happens to it if they make any modifications to make the texture a little bit more subtle, if people decide that they actually really like it, and if they find a niche for it, then obviously there's plenty of places it could go. If nothing else, it looked like superheated brick if you wanted to imply that there was a lot of heat coming off of something, like there's lava behind the walls and there's geothermal power going on, then maybe, yeah, it feels kind of like it could fit into something like that. I'm thinking of like Star Wars environments, where they've got kind of big factories where they're using lava to power things, or like, Darth Vader's suit getting assembled on Mustafar with all of the lava flows everywhere and stuff. Like you could have situations like that where a block like that will really stand out against like darker blacks and even stark whites. But it remains to be seen how I'm going to use it, because I honestly have no idea right now.
Do you have any idea how you're going to use Eyeblossoms?
Not around bees, let me tell you. I don't know why they poison bees.
It's such a bad move.
It's the one thing that baffles me about this, because, yeah, like, if you want to have flowers and stuff in an environment like that, like, I don't see the connection. Like, it doesn't seem like a logical thing other than just, the Pale Garden is a bit spooky, stay away. Fine, you take them out of the Pale Garden, they still poison bees? Like, I think bees already go after wither roses, right? Or do they avoid wither roses? I forget. Like, if they've made changes to the bee AI, I can't remember exactly what they do, but I feel like the wither rose is already something that players know to avoid, because there is player feedback in, if you stand in a wither rose, it gives you the wither effect. You automatically get the thorns. And so with the Eyeblossom not doing that for players, it doesn't poison you if you stand in it. There is no like logical leap that the player makes where they go, maybe I should keep this away from my bees, because it doesn't do anything to poison the player. And so I think that's my problem, is like you're not really signposted that behavior until it's too late, and the bees that you've been working to cultivate all end up dying. So yeah, they have a cool name, they have a cool concept. I love the fact that they can be harvested open or closed, and that makes different colors of dye. It's our first gray dye flower, I think, because the others are all light gray. The Wither Rose gives you black, yeah. But there's no like, darker gray dye, so that's good. And they have this mechanic of like communicating with each other and encouraging the others nearby to open or close, which is sort of the inverse of copper aging slower if there are blocks of a similar age around. And I think it's a cool idea, but I'm not sure really what benefit it has other than just atmosphere. Like, that's the kind of thing I've seen people going, well, what can we do with that? Like, surely there's like a mechanic that we can, work with here, but I don't honestly know what you'd use that for. Maybe, again, some folks who are more experienced with, figuring out new redstone contraptions based on whatever new mechanics get added could write in at the usual email address and let us know, but I'm still not 100% certain what the deal is with Eyeblossoms. I'm just like, I like the fact that they exist. I think they're a nice aesthetic addition, and it's cool that we get a flower in the Pale Garden after having asked for there being more unique flora there. I feel like it's a couple of things that just baffle me about the execution of this one.
I'm with you on the bees, specifically because you can't control where bees go. Like, if you had a way to like put something next to this that a bee would also completely avoid, like a bee just won't come within 10 blocks of this thing, like hide it under the ground next to your Eyeblossoms, and then your bees aren't going to go by. But even with the improvement to bees, like I still feel like people are going to want to put these probably open in their gardens as they decorate around their houses. And if they already have bees nearby, depending on how far the bee decides to travel to pollinate something, like, then you're going to have bees taking damage, which is not an experience you want to have, because bees can be kind of a pain in the butt to move around. So I feel like this was just like a strange way to add damage to bees. I do like the idea of the blossoms in the Pale Garden. I think it adds that kind of like orange highlight, that contrast that you're kind of looking for. I don't think you're going to confuse it with the eyes of a creaking or a creaking heart, because it's going to be so low on the ground. That's why I was kind of holding out for like mushrooms or a mushroom pattern. But I guess that's the whole idea behind the resin spawning on the pale oak trees, is that it does sort of look like it could be the eyes of a creaking. I don't know about the way that the flowers change and interact with each other. The only thing that I can think of is that right now the Eyeblossom will open and close depending on the time of day. I'm wondering if the fact that the flowers influence one another and are waiting to hear from one another is just a way to have not the entire forest of Eyeblossoms blink at the same time. Like the moment that the Minecraft time goes to like, it's dark enough, and have the entire forest just kind of go boop in one go would look really strange, right? It would almost look like a glitch. So I'm wondering if there's just like some sort of light level, or if it's a random thing, like some sort of random tick to say, well, once the light level gets down, open up within the next so many ticks. But if a neighbor opens up, open up sooner. Like I don't know whether it's just like an experience thing, but the fact that it's included in the notes, it's like, it's strange to let us know, because if it's only just behind the scenes to make it look good, then like, why do we know about it? And I don't know what it could be used for. Like it's an odd way to go about it. It is neat that we finally have a flower in the game that will change. Like it'll actually shift. It's not going to be animated per se. It's going to pop from one state to the next. But it's cool that we have a flower that can open. We don't have any other flower that does that. They just exist. They don't grow up. They don't, I guess the closest thing you have is crops. But once they go through their cycle, they're done, right? They don't change throughout the day. And it's cool to have, especially a flower that's made up, like it's meant for the Pale Garden. It's obviously not a real flower in real life. It might be inspired by one, but it's not something from real life. And it's something that I think, like the torch flower and the what's the other one?
Pitcher pod.
Blanking. Pitcher pod. Thank you. Like those things have different stages. The pitcher pods, pitcher plants, but the torch flower just kind of sits there. It does its own thing. It would be cool if the torch flower had some sort of similar open and closing, or leaning one way or the other, following the sun. Like stuff like that could be really interesting as a precedent to add to decorative blocks like flowers in Minecraft. So that part I think is really cool. The fact that it's an Eyeblossom and it's the same color as the creaking eyes, like it's neat. Like I do like the actual model. I do like also that when you collect it, if you place it in a dimension that doesn't have a day-night cycle, then it'll just stay the way that you collected it. So if you collect all of your Eyeblossoms at night and they're open, and you bring them into the Nether or the end, they're just going to stay that way, and that's neat. I think that's a cool way to give players control, right? And that's what we usually want, is more control.
Yeah, and I think they'd work really well in the Nether too. That kind of like grey, ashy kind of petal to them, and then the orange, obviously evocative of lava and everything else. So like again, I think a solid aesthetic choice, and something that we can move elsewhere to interesting effect. They've obviously got a grayer, like more desaturated stem to them, so they look at home in the Pale Garden. They're going to look slightly off-putting or unsettling elsewhere, and I think there's a lot of room to be played around with in spooky builds for stuff like that. I guess if you wanted to avoid them poisoning bees, you could also put them in flower pots, because I don't think bees will visit those, and the flower doesn't have the same hitbox and interaction. Like you can put a wither rose in a flower pot and it doesn't wither you, so I suppose that's an option that's still not going to hurt the bees. But yeah, the bee thing is just a little strange to me. I've also seen some people complaining, like they did with torch flowers, that they're not emissive, that they don't have any light level to them, and I can understand that, because once again, it's a flower that looks like it's glowing in the texture, but is not glowing in terms of its actual light level. But I think for that, you've got to consider that they're going to be dotted around the biome. Even like one light level is going to affect mob spawning. And so if you have a little cluster of them and they're giving off like 1 or 2 light level, then that's going to limit mob spawning to other areas where the flowers aren't growing. And then it makes that whole experience a bit more predictable and less organic. So I think maybe that's the reason why, even though brown mushrooms still grow in like little clusters here and there and have a light level of 1, I think those are not necessarily constrained by biome in the same way. And we know the creaking isn't affected by light level, it's just a day-night cycle spawn, but I can still see flowers being emissive kind of messing with what they want people to be able to do with flowers and what the biome is doing with flowers in general. So that's my take on that. Like, I don't need flowers to be emissive at this point. I've kind of made my peace with the fact that we have glowberries, we have sea pickles, and then we have glow lichen and a couple of other things that are decent as low-level light sources and variable enough that they'll work in a variety of situations.
It doesn't help that Mojang described them as glowing at night either. In the
yeah. There's it's really difficult because they don't want to put dynamic light in the game, but then they introduce stuff like the glow squid, and they don't want to put like lit up foliage in the game, but then they introduce the torch flower and another flower that they suggest like glows. It's more just like they want to evoke a certain mood without necessarily tying it to mechanics in that way, and that's always a little rough. Last thing I guess we'll talk about, changes to the creaking. So that's had a couple of changes in this Bedrock release, some of which brought it in line with what already happens on Java, but higher attack value, a couple of changes in animation. The thing I hadn't considered was the possibility of getting soft locked if it fell into a hole with you. That's actually kind of hilarious, but probably not very fun if you experienced it for the first time. And I guess they're guaranteed to despawn. So the worst case scenario is you have to either relog or you wait 10 minutes for the sun to come up. But then if you're waiting, then obviously you're staying in a hole, and then a creeper walks in and, drops in with you. Then you don't have the problem that you're standing in a one-block hole anymore, but then you have other problems. So hopefully that being a sensible solution is like the creaking despawns after a few seconds. If it's occupying the same block space as a player, that does make sense. But as long as it doesn't have the capacity for either you or the creaking to move. So I'm curious whether if you can just stand on the same block as a creaking, it will still do that, or if it has to be really precise about the location of both the creaking and the player.
I'm imagining that if you get into the same block space as a creaking, that you'll either bounce off it or it'll bounce off you. Just trying to move a villager around, same idea.
Yeah, standard collision mechanics.
Yeah, I think it's the one by one that I think forces you into the space, and because of the size of the creaking, I think its hitbox then gets outside of your immediate range to break the blocks.
Yeah,
so,
they are
basically.
They're 3 blocks tall, right? So they're like Endermen. So you couldn't put something over your head either, potentially. And there's no way. And that's, I think, maybe one of the reasons they didn't implement something like an indestructible mob before. Because, imagine getting stuck in the same block space as the Warden if it was impossible to kill back in the day. I think, there's legitimate reasons why you avoid stuff like that. So a smart update. I think it's probably a good decision. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly is the problem I didn't even realize I had with the creaking was the lack of feedback when you break the creaking heart. You don't get the satisfaction of seeing it crumble. Like, most of the time you look around and there's like a couple of particles on the ground where it was, but because you can't keep track of its location, it's harder to confirm whether or not the creaking is actually dead. And you have to get like a really specific angle on it when you break the heart in order to see it collapse. So I think it's actually more satisfying to confirm that it's dealt with if you break the creaking heart and then you turn around and it's got a couple of seconds of like despawn animation before it dies.
Yeah, that to me made a lot of sense. And it was one of the only animations that I thought looked good, like the kind of like perky, jerky, twitchy kind of tremble before it crumbles in front of you. Worked really well. Did not feel the same way about the new animations and the new speed at which the creaking moves, because the animations also increase with the speed. So instead of being creaky, it's jittery, and it really reads as kind of like buggy. It doesn't come across very well to me anyway, as someone that worked in animation for years. I think that in a large part, I don't envy the people trying to make these characters move because of the limits they continue to put on themselves with no knees, straight limbs, and the shuffle walk. And I find that you just hamstring yourself into making anything feel believable or having a character to it, as opposed to having it just kind of like float along the ground or shuffle towards you. Endermen, I find, get away with it because they teleport so much. So they kind of like, you don't really see much of a walk cycle from an Enderman. Usually it's like 2 or 3 steps and then they zoop across the screen. But with these, you really feel the strange way that they cover ground, and they sort of like shuffle, and their arms flail. Like, it feels very flaily. It doesn't feel focused or purposeful. And I think that something can be said for pauses in animation. Like, I think the creaking should be like, its arms and legs should move slower for, what it is. And I know that they wanted to increase the speed at which it approaches you, but like have it take bigger strides. You don't have to be taking little tiny steps, like you're shuffling across the floor, which is what it looks like it does now. And there's something about it that just does not seem to give the impression that we have so far heard from Mojang. Like they wanted to be creepy, they wanted to sneak up on you, they wanted to attack you from behind, and it just it doesn't feel threatening when it looks really silly. And so I think that's the issue that I have right now with it.
I think we're used to imagining tree creatures like this as like Ents that are like, big and lumbering and kind of taking long strides and taking a long time to do anything, but being kind of unstoppable. And what we get is more wacky inflatable tube man kind of stuff where it's like it's a little bit flaily, it's a little bit like Kermit the Frog kind of arms flailing a bit.
Totally.
And I think there are games in which like something moving towards you jerkily and rapidly is used to great effect in horror games. And so for a more modern audience, I can see why it makes sense for animations like that to exist. I can see players on multiplayer servers seeing a friend being chased by the creaking so they actually get to witness the movement animation and finding it like scary from the sense that it's just unnatural in its movements. But yeah, I think from a more adult perspective, I guess, from the perspective of something that's going to freak out you or I feel like we're just like, well, this is dumb. Like I feel like maybe we're not quite the audience for that approach to the animation, but maybe they have an audience in mind for it when they're trying to cook up that stuff. I'm interested to see if they iterate on it some more, and I'm looking forward to some of this stuff coming to Java Edition in a snapshot hopefully soon as well, so that we can check it out and play a little bit more with the block choices and everything. For now, though, I think that's where we'll wrap up this discussion. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, consider putting some value back in. You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community, where pledging at any level will get you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when Joel and I record it in Discord every week. We also have our monthly hangouts where our patrons can let us know what they've been up to in Minecraft that month. There was a lot of desert builds and a lot of spooky builds this month, so it's really fun. If you want to listen to the latest one of those, it's up on the RSS feed now. We currently have 310 patrons, which is up one from last week. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. Just tell a friend about the Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. You can find us at the Spawn Chunks on social media. New shows are published on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. That includes YouTube for the video version. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com, and the RSS feed is on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its third season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series, and I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on social media. You mostly find me on Instagram and Blue Sky these days. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online is at joelduggan.com. That includes links to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I'm Joel Duggan on social media, Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I am currently streaming Tuesday through Saturday at about 1 o'clock Atlantic. That's UTC minus 3 hours for now. Tune in on November 3rd when that changes. Right now, still playing a lot of Satisfactory, but I, again, will thank many of our listeners that wrote in and reached out to me on social media with some recommendations for some mods to go along with Create, because I am looking to check out Create in Minecraft. So look for that soon on twitch.tv/Joel Duggan.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and the hills have eye blossoms.